Welcome everybody to this, what I think will be a wonderful event. My name is Willeke Wendrich. I'm the director of the Cotsen Institute of Archaeology at UCLA, which you see here behind me. And I want to quickly explain how today's event will work. So, first of all, we will do a brief round of introduction, and as you've seen on the flyer, we have three people who have recently been hired, and 3 people who are very well versed in hiring archaeologists from different walks of life, different disciplines, academic, CRM. And then I will ask you a number of questions, first to the recent hirees, Angela, Albert, and Christina, and then to our hirers, Stephen, Sarah, and Julie. And then after that, this whole thing will last for about 55 minutes. We will open up 6 breakout rooms, and you're all to choose who you want to talk to, who you want to ask further questions. So, or you can just leave the meeting. But this is your chance to go to speak to different people who have experience in the field of being hired or hiring in archaeology. You choose your room. You can also switch meeting rooms, but I'll explain that when we get there. So without further ado, let's start with the introduction of our speakers of today. First of all, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your experiences with us. I start with Angela. Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you guys for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak to you guys today. I am an archaeologist and I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs as one of their senior historic preservation specialists in their central office in DC. However, I'm remote, so I am based out of Texas right now. Most of my career has been focused on the management of historic property in compliance with federal and environmental law. Previous to my current position, which I've been in for a whopping 3 weeks, not even yet, so brand new hiree here. I was working at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation for 4 years as one of their program analysts that was reviewing federal projects under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So that's me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. A recent hiree, another recent hiree, Albert Gonzalez.
Hi, thank you. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this. I'm really excited to be part of this group. So I'm a high school dropout and a product of the East Dallas barrio in Texas. I was a software developer for 10 years before I started grad school. I did not have a degree. I was still a dropout when I became a software developer. Back then in the 90s, all you needed was a beating heart and half a brain and you could get into software. I did the PhD at Southern Methodist University, SMU. I barely made it through the last phase of the PhD. It was by the skin of my teeth, truly. I think it was like a 50-50 chance that it would have even happened near the end there, but it did. And now I'm an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology, Geography, and Environmental Studies at Cal State East Bay, a teaching college in Northern California Bay Area. I'm recently tenured, so I'm an associate now, which I'm really excited about, just tenured last year. I direct our museum here, Anthropology Museum, and an Earth and Architecture lab. I'm a specialist in Latinx and Indigenous Studies. I do experimental archaeology, conventional archaeology, and so on, but I'm a former CRM director and acting PI, so I was connected to some hiring there, at least hiring decisions anyway. I've been on several hiring committees here so far. The most recent one I chaired, and I have the dubious distinction of being the worst salary negotiator on record, which is something that we can all talk and laugh about later. So I'm excited to learn more about the other panelists here, and I'm excited to answer the panel questions and your questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Albert. And I actually might vie with you for the worst negotiator because I didn't even know you could negotiate when I became an assistant professor. I had no clue. I was just happy to have a job. Okay, Christina.
Thank you, Willeke. I'm Kristina Douglass. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at Penn State, and I've been here at Penn State for 4.5 years. I work primarily in Southwest Madagascar, but also in other island and coastal contexts, especially interested in Africa and the Indian Ocean. And I look primarily at environmental questions, really interested in how landscapes change over time and how intergenerational knowledge shapes those landscapes and is shaped by them. I have also been on hiring committees, and so I have a little bit of both sides of the equation in terms of perspectives, and really excited to talk with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Acabado.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Just like Willeke and Albert, I never negotiated when I was offered a job here. It was a dream job. And when I was I grew up in the Philippines and received my BA, and my goal was just to finish my degree and to get a job to help my family. But opportunities, whatever opportunity came my way, I grabbed it. But now I'm an associate professor of anthropology and also the director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. I work in the Philippines focusing on indigenous responses to colonialism. And then in my past life, I did a lot of landscape archaeology. But because of the findings of my work, which impinges on the identity of the peoples that I work with, we started an indigenous archaeology program in the Philippines, where the communities that I work with are the ones directing the research program. So I'm on my 8th year at UCLA, and I've been on several hiring committees as well.
Thank you. Sarah, Herr.
Hi there, I'm Sarah Herr, and I'm president of Desert Archaeology. I've been in this role for 5 years. This is a private sector cultural resource management firm that works primarily in Arizona, a little bit more in the Southwest. And our company turned 40 last month. I thought when I went to grad school at the University of Arizona that I would be pursuing an academic track, but a lot of grad students in Arizona work CRM as part of their way of funding their way through grad school, and I did the same. And I started here as a temporary worker in 1995, a long time ago. And by the time there was a choice of which career path to go, I very much enjoyed the CRM context, and I very much enjoyed the way that we all work in teams here. So I rose up the ranks to be a project director and worked in that role for a while, doing research largely in sort of the marginal areas, the frontiers, the prehistoric frontiers of the past. And then I rose up a little more 5 years ago. So.
Thank you. And Julie Stein.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I started out my career as a geoarchaeologist with a double degree in geology and anthropology. And I quickly shifted to coastal settings and shell middens because their stratigraphy is so complicated. Soon I began working here in the Pacific Northwest, especially when I had children and had to stay closer to home. And I found that I shifted to administration at the University of Washington after I had been running a field school for 9 years, which is actually quite an administrative feat, as you all know. I then shifted to museums, and I've been the director of the Burke Museum of Natural History for the last 16 years. And in these roles, I have done academic hiring as part of the anthropology department. As an administrator in the dean's office, I did all kinds of academic hiring in chairs. And then when I moved to the museum, I did more state mandated staff hiring. And so I have seen lots of different kinds of interviews and processes. And unlike Willeke and Albert, I got really good at negotiating salaries. So one thing I learned.
Thank you. So I want to start with our three hirees who also have hiring experience, but I'm in first instance really interested in your experience when you were preparing for job interviews and for a career. So what did you do in preparation to get hired? Did you make specific choices, for instance, in your thesis subject? Did you choose where, what, when to publish? Did you do a lot of effort to get teaching experience? Did you do extracurricular activities? What did you do to make yourself as attractive as possible for the job that you really wanted to get? And Angela, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So archaeology is kind of an unconventional career trajectory, as I'm sure you guys are well aware. My trajectory is even more unusual, I think, because when I graduated in 2008 from undergrad, and I got married really young, 22, right after that, and I married a military guy. And so I have been a military spouse for the past 14 years, which means I move a ton, even more than a lot of archaeologists, but I don't get to choose to go where the work is. So in preparing for my career, flexibility was the name of the game for me, and networking. So we move probably every 1 to 2 years. In the last 14 years, I've lived in, I think, 9 or 10 places. So whenever we got to a new duty station, for me, it was hit the ground running on anything that was archaeological related or tangential, which means archives, museums, historic commissions, anything that was available in the area. So I've kind of had octopus tentacles in all sorts of different fields. I taught community college courses in anthropology and archaeology for 2 years. And worked for a slew of CRM firms, and just recently in the past 5-6 years have kind of transferred over to working in the federal sector to try and find a little bit more stability. And one of the silver linings of COVID is that a lot of the desk work makes it, and more remote work makes it a lot easier. But starting out, yeah, for me, it was, I didn't have an exact desire to be, a tenure track professor or to rise through the ranks through CRM or go a museum track. It was, I want to make a career in archaeology, so whatever I could, which at the time, starting out was very stressful for me because, you compare your trajectory with other people and realize, you're not going to be the master of whatever sector you're in. So very much the jack of all trades, master of none. But getting up and working with the federal sector, realized that became a big bonus because they do so many different things, and so much of historic preservation pulls from a lot of different areas, and teaching these courses and going out and talking to a lot of different consulting parties and lots of different interest groups. So I found that sort of flexibility, which I thought was a liability, in the beginning, became a strength the more experiences that I collected over time. So. And I will also say too that because of that, I separated out my undergrad from my grad school. I worked for 4 years in between. And when I decided to go back to grad school, I'd been straddling academia and CRM in the first part of my career, and decided to go back to school for a master's because in the United States, meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards for professional qualifications for archaeology requires an advanced degree. But those same standards didn't dictate what kind of focus you were going to be on. So I focused completely on Mesoamerican archaeology, knowing full well it would be very difficult to find a position in that. But because I was super passionate about it, I figured that might be the only time I'd have a chance to do it, at least in this first couple decades of my career. So yeah, preparation for me was really just octopus tentacles and everything I could touch, any experience I could get.
Yeah, it's often hard to really be strategic about this because it's such a strange field in a way. And from your introduction, Albert, it seemed already that you really didn't have a very strict plan. What was your experience?
I didn't, and that's, my preparation for the interview when the time came ended up being for the job that I got, ended up being sort of inadvertently, inadvertent preparation. And that the truth is, when I left SMU after my coursework was over, only because I couldn't stand to be in Dallas anymore, and I just wasn't in love with what I was doing in terms of the program. And so I left and went to kind of bounce around between Columbia, New York, and Cal as a visiting scholar and researcher. And that whole time, I didn't have any financial support, so I needed to support myself by teaching, and that was largely community college courses. So I've taught everywhere from Queens College to various colleges out here. It used to be the case not that long ago that for R1s and many teaching colleges, even four-year teaching colleges, that a lot of community college work tarnish your brand. And which is hugely problematic way of seeing things, but it was definitely the case, and it's still the case in some universities, I realized. But at Cal State East Bay, I mean, they're in a moment where what they really needed is somebody who's flexible enough to be able to teach various different types of courses, even outside of our typical realm. And it ended up being, and this is going to sound weird, and I'm not sure how this should translate to folks, but it was my sort of financial desperation and my willingness to prep any damn course they would ask me to teach anywhere. I'm not a biological anthropologist. I've taught maybe more biological anthropology lower division courses than anything else. Now I am one, at least in teaching various courses. I've taught history courses, et cetera, et cetera. And when it came down to it, the interview, and I asked about this afterwards because I was embarrassed about this answer to this question, but they gave me the list of courses. They gave me a paper with all the courses that we teach here and dropped it in front of me and said, okay, these courses, which are you comfortable teaching? Their assumption on there now, knowing what being on that end is like, is that I would say just like 3 or 4 things, but I looked over the list and I thought, I've been in all these places, I thought, okay, well, with the exception of this medical anthropology course, I'll teach anything else here. And I can do it comfortably. The looks that I got, I thought I really screwed this one up, but afterwards I found out that was my best answer. That was the best answer I had. That's what they wanted to know, right? At the same time, they wanted to know that they had someone who could produce some actual research, but it's not, we're not producing multiple articles a year here, right? It's not what we're doing at the CSU system for the most part, right? Most of our campuses. So that ended up having that breadth of experience in teaching ended up being the everything, because my understanding is the folks that were competing with me did not have that. Increasingly, the jobs that are available, are teaching college and community college jobs, and that's one of the things that they're interested in. So my experience, it just is the right place, right time in terms of the job. I'm not sure how I would have fared if I'd been applying. I wasn't applying anywhere else really that year, not academic. If I'd been applying at R1s that year, I'm not sure that I would have fared quite as well, because my research background wasn't strong, because I spent a lot of time bouncing around. I'll zip up now. There are other folks that need to speak, but
No, but this is just so useful to hear. So yes, thanks. Christina, did you do any specific preparation?
Well, I think one of the defining features of my early career was both a feeling of anxiety because I was observing people in the cohort, in my grad program, in the cohort ahead of me start struggling on the job market. And so I had this sense that, this was not what it was chalked up to be. And I did my PhD at Yale. And I think that a lot of the attitude there was that, hey, we're Yale students, of course we're going to get jobs, we shouldn't be concerned. And I think both a feeling of not being totally included in parts, especially in kind of in some circles at Yale, paired with this seeing ahead a little bit through some of my peers that the job market was a difficult thing to approach, gave me a lot of anxiety that made me search for other circles, other networks very early on. And so I was pregnant with my first son and trying to finish up my dissertation, and decided that I would apply for a postdoc at the Smithsonian, one of their fellowships that can be a 2-year fellowship. And I told one of my, academic advisors or mentors about this, and was swiftly discouraged from applying, and was told, well, one, maybe it's not really necessary. Do you really want to go into sort of that do you really want to go down that route? Is that what you're interested in? But also it's hyper competitive. You don't have any prior sort of museum experience or anything like this, or collections experience. So don't apply. And I'm very grateful that I didn't listen to that piece of advice, and I applied anyway, and was really shocked to get offered a fellowship. That fellowship was really, I think, the opening up of a whole new network for me, a whole new professional network that really, I think, has paved the way for me ever since in so many ways. Network in terms of mentorship, but in terms of opportunities, and also to kind of echo a little bit of what Albert shared. When I was there, one of my mentors suggested to me that it would be helpful to try to gain some teaching experience, and also, financially, realistically, we needed more income. And so I sent out an email to all of the department chairs at nearby institutions and just introduced myself, in a short paragraph. I attached my CV, introduced myself as a, recent PhD grad, interested in picking up any teaching opportunities, if any were available, if they needed to fill a course, and was very fortunate to get an opportunity through George Mason to teach a class. So I got to teach, ecological anthropology. And that was also a really critical piece of preparation then, because as I was then starting to apply for academic jobs beyond the postdoc, that the fact that I was teaching that class at George Mason kept coming up as a strength of the application at that time. And I think, maybe I shouldn't even admit this, but when I gave my Penn State job talk and they introduced me, I really shouldn't be saying this, but I had taught at George Mason at that point, maybe for 2 weeks. This was at the start of the semester. And they introduced me as, a postdoctoral fellow at the Smithsonian and adjunct professor at George Mason. And I'm convinced that made a difference, even just being introduced that way, even though I'd only been teaching there, for 2 weeks. I barely knew, my way around campus. So that was very helpful. But I will emphasize that it was always sort of that anxiety of trying to look ahead and find communities that I could rely on, because I had gotten signals, not from everyone, but from some people, in the community in which I did my PhD, that I didn't really totally belong, or I had been admitted because, I'm a person of color. And so I always felt a little bit uneasy, and that made me try to expand my social networks. And as an African born person, I feel like this totally makes sense in my psychology, that you rely on your community and on your people, and the denser you can make that network, not like a network in terms of just knowing important people, but really just a network of support and people who will go to bat for you, or who will flag an opportunity and say, have you thought of this? It makes total sense to me that's how I've kind of navigated many aspects of this space.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the way you describe network is also a group of people you can trust in, I think is really important. Yeah, and that anxiety I recognize from my students, and several students who recently graduated and actually chose for a career outside archaeology because of that anxiety. So it's a hard thing to contend with. You already went into a little bit what my next question is, so maybe you can just continue. Did you meet any difficulties, resistance, or blockades during your graduate career or on the road leading to your first job?
Do you have a specific order, Willeke, or anybody should just
I
jump
thought,
in?
can you just continue, because you
Oh,
basically
sure.
already were talking about this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And this actually reminds me of something that Angela was talking about briefly in terms of like federal jobs and things like that. I have 2 points, I guess, that I want to make. One was that I realized also in becoming a part of the Smithsonian community, how much certain industries or certain areas in which we can get jobs in archaeology really require getting your foot in the door very early on. And, you know, had I kind of known this and I could talk to my younger self, I would say, you know, as much as possible, if you're imagining, for example, that you want to work with a federal agency or like with the Smithsonian or something like that, that getting internships early on and even just learning the skills of navigating the application platforms for some of these federal positions is really valuable sort of skill set. And I stumbled against that, you know, early on in applying when I was a postdoc, applying to a full-time position at the Smithsonian and realizing, wow, I can't even really navigate this computer system very well. You know, I'm not really sure what they're asking me in this case or why this matters or anyway. So that was one component of challenge on a practical level. But the other was just, and I think this also speaks to something Angela was talking about, is, you know, feeling very much like I knew a little bit about a lot of different things, but to my point earlier, also about not feeling totally included or mentored at various points, finding it very difficult to get hands-on sort of apprenticeship style training in different methods and lab methods especially. I found that very, very difficult as a woman of color, just getting, you know, entree somehow. It seemed to me, and this is my impression only, you know, so take it as you will, but it seemed to me that some people were able to sort of get invited somehow magically into these situations where they could work on someone's, you know, project with them, gain, you know, skills in, you know, analytical methods and whatnot. And somehow I wasn't getting invited and I didn't really know how to gain that kind of experience. The way our program is set up at Penn State, I think that's mitigated to a large extent because we have these research groups that are organized around labs. And so if you're, you know, when you're admitted as a student, you're kind of folded in automatically. But in my grad program, that was not the case. So I found it very difficult to try to get substantial, you know, methodological training and analytical training, and found that I was then always trying to catch up and play catch up. And then, you know, the further along you get in your career, the more worried you are that, you know, you should already know this. And so, and then it makes it more difficult, almost as from a, you know, I don't know, ego perspective or something, to get that additional training. And I think that would have been very helpful also. So if I could speak to my younger self in terms of overcoming some of those barriers, I think I would have just been very explicit in thinking of a particular set of methods that I wanted to develop expertise in, approaching people who are working with those methods and saying very explicitly, listen, I would like to learn how to do this. May I, you know, volunteer in your lab or work with you until I can master this? And I didn't do that and really wish that I had. So that's something that, you know, I continue to think would have been helpful preparation for the job market.
Yeah, those are all great points. Angela, your reaction.
Yes, definitely. Those were some of the same stumbling blocks that I had too. I didn't understand the magic behind how people got paired with, you know, the right people to get mentored. And I kind of chalked it up to, I wasn't staying with one company long enough or staying in one place long enough to kind of build those relationships that would get there. So that kind of magical formula always eluded me too. And same sort of thing, like if I could go back to even just in undergrad and then right after graduation, I was very terrified of asking questions. And because I think in the very beginning, you feel like when you're trying to present yourself of please hire me or please mentor me, you want to appear competent, but at the same time you're approaching these opportunities because you don't know and because you want that sort of assistance in learning and growing. And so navigating that was very terrifying for me in my like undergraduate career and right in the beginning. And I wish I could go back and say, no one cares. No one's tracking what you did when you were 20 years old, you know, and they're going to talk to somebody 20 years from now and say, oh, I remember when she came and asked and she had no idea any of this, like, you know, osteological perspective, that sort of thing. But that's the kind of thing that hindsight now I think really helps with. But so I would echo what Christina says, that, yeah, I mean, for everybody who's starting out, ask questions, go ask to be part of things, cold call people, go network, because that really is where you make those connections and it gets your name. And it's just that spark of recognition of people saying, oh, you know, I heard so-and-so I met at a conference was asking about positions like this, and I don't need it, but you know, you can pass a name along. And that's such a big part of how my career trajectory has progressed throughout. So going into my first job, I would say too that the biggest blockade I had, I was actually a history undergrad major and I didn't have a field school. So I walked into my first job at a national training center, the military installation in California at Fort Irwin. And they had a curation facility there and a bunch of archaeologists. And I walked in with my CV and I said, look, I just graduated. I'm here. Is there any possible, you know, way I can get involved in any capacity? Whatever you've got, I'll take it. And nobody in there liked writing reports. I said, well, I'm a history major. All I do is write. And so they said, okay, well, we'll teach you how to go out and dig holes and survey and all of that jazz, if you don't mind doing all of the technical editing for our reports. And so it was such a great foot in the door for me to leverage a skill set that wasn't necessarily, you know, I didn't have the field school yet. I didn't have traditional experience in that way. I didn't have the degree in anthropology, but to leverage what you've got into the next position and then use that, and you can keep on building on that. So while I worked while I worked at Fort Irwin, I was able to go and do a field school. And that's what kind of inspired me to then say, okay, you know, this is a trajectory that I want to continue down and then go back to grad school and that sort of thing. One of the other blocks that has happened kind of continually as I moved around the country is realizing that geographic focus really matters. So if you know, we're rising through their ranks working for 3 years in the Southwest and then you move to Southeast, they're going to want to start you at the bottom. And that was very difficult for me. I mean, from wanting to progress in my career, but also from an ego standpoint too of, you know, I'm coming at like 8-10 years of work now, you know, I would like to keep going up. But when you move to a new region and you don't have the contacts there, that was a big blockade for me. And so one of the ways that I kind of got over that was going to every single conference I could and talking to people directly, because cold emails weren't working in that respect. There was a lot of people looking for positions everywhere we moved, but getting that face time with people. And so they would, you know, you could talk about your situation and your experience was really helpful. And the last blockade I would say is just the language that each part of archaeology speaks to is totally different. And I think when I first graduated, I thought, you know, you study archaeology and history, it's all kind of the same. It can translate into all the different spheres, museum, it can translate to historic preservation, all over the place. But the more I kind of got experience, I realized that there's a whole language that's subset for each kind of field, you know, each trajectory in the field that you go with, and you have to do translations. So you have to be able to translate your experience into the lingo of academia or museums or historic preservation, federal compliance. And that was something I really wish that someone had sat me down and talked me through, because in the beginning you think, oh, I've got this, you know, I've got all these skill sets. I don't understand why I'm not getting any traction with, you know, getting interviews and that sort of thing. But reading as much as you can and taking trainings from and really studying people's resumes who are in the positions you're interested in really helped me start, you know, kind of the Rosetta Stone of like, oh, well, they call this, and then go Google what that means and say, oh, well, I've got that, but I've been calling it something else this whole time. So those are kind of the big blockades that or stumbling blocks I had.
Yeah, thank you. And Albert.
Sure, Angela. I have a BA in history too. My BA and my first MA are both in history, and I'll tell you why. This has to do with obstacles and hurdles. I had no idea that archaeology wasn't part of history. When I was, when I was just getting into college, I didn't know. We didn't even have any anthropology degree. Where I did UT Dallas, where I did my bachelor's. I just thought, by the time I got to my senior year, I was in college for a long time. Senior years. I asked one of my professors, I said, so when do we start taking archaeology classes? When we start talking about archaeology, I had no clue. And they said, we don't. And I just kind of hung around in the same program through the master's, try to figure out how to get into archaeology. And that's what it took, is some time where I wasn't working, because I went to school at night when I was a programmer, where I just quit and I wasn't working, did a master's and just kind of figured things out, took my basic, my lower division anthropology courses and figured out what it really means to be an archaeologist. I was just as lost and clueless for a full decade afterwards, and I still remain that way in many ways today. So as you can probably tell, I'm brown, I'm Latinx, I'm Latino, but I'm also hood, and that makes a big difference, because in my grad program at SMU, there were plenty of people of color. There were very few people that were hood, and that's enormously important, because it's one thing to be brown, and it's another altogether to be brown and broke, right? There's a different level of privilege that we don't often talk about, right? And that left me in a place where I felt completely lost. Honestly, I went to our gatherings and things, our department gatherings, and I saw cheeses I've never seen before in my life, right? I don't know what to do with any of this stuff, right? I'm looking around like, where's the cheese whiz? Where's the machine that spits it out? Because I don't know what to do here, that's how I was in that world for a long time. Ultimately in grad school, things I can say now that I'm tenured and don't care anymore what people think. I was broke. I was recently divorced. My dad had just died right around the time I hit my third year of coursework. And there was only one person in the department who believed in my research questions, right? They all liked the research generally, they all liked the topic. Only one person believed in my research questions. I stood up to defend my proposal, my dissertation proposal 5 times. There was one person who believed in my research questions. Those were the obstacles. They were cultural, they were research related, and it had a good deal to do with what I wanted to research was inequality, period, right? I wanted to know how my own people ended up in the position that they're in today via my research in some way. And it's just really only one person really, really cared about that question. One person isn't enough. And I had to cycle through advisors to get to somewhere where there's alignment there. And my advice to folks who are grad students now, you always hear like somebody who's having troubles with their advisor wants to escape, but is scared of, starting over and taking another year or two. I'll tell you, you can take a year or two now to readjust, or you can suffer for another decade having to be connected to this person that you deplore or just can't work with, or just won't work with you. That was a pretty huge issue for me. The second thing was, as I started to leave that, is a fear of tarnishing my brand by teaching at all, first of all, and even more so teaching at teaching colleges, especially community colleges. I was scared to death of teaching at community college. I wasn't going to put it on my resume, right? Because that's how I was sort of raised in the academy. Is that that's the death knell of your career if you have teaching college or a community college listed on your resume. And now how foolish I think that is. You see my resume now, you'll see all it's a slew of community colleges that I taught at in the past. I think we need to get over that fear and also get over the fear of applying for teaching jobs at teaching colleges and community colleges. That's an enormous obstacle for me. I still have friends to this day who, when I hear from them that, well, the cycle's over, I can't apply for anything else. The community college cycle begins in March. Right? But everyone ignores that completely. It's last resort. Somehow, if you're rejected for 4 years in a row, then you finally turn to community college or CRM as if those things were some sort of consolation prize. Things are changing, don't get me wrong, but they're not changing fast enough. And I feel like there's great jobs to be had and still great research to be done, despite be getting hired by a teaching college. So I'm so glad I'm over that hurdle, but it took a lot to get there. I mean, I'm 44 now, like it took a long time to get there. Thank you.
And tenure in that sense just gives you space to breathe and space to really develop your ideas without always having to look over your shoulder in a way. Yeah. I'm going to shift to the hirers, even though you all have also experience in hiring. So in the breakout rooms, you can answer both those questions. So I want to start with Stephen. What are you looking for in job candidates, beyond, of course, the specialized knowledge that they might have? So, yeah, what are you looking out for?
Thanks, everyone, and I empathize, or no, I'm cognizant and aware of your experiences, but I also went through that phase where I had to work in grad school and also teach at community colleges to support myself, and being told that you only need to TA and teach one and you're good enough to apply for an R1 university. But I feel that as professors, teachers, we need to be able to work with undergraduate students, especially for us on R1 settings. That I think I remember someone telling me that you're not being hired by UCLA to teach, but to do research. Working with undergraduate students, and I have an intense relationship with my mentors, my mentees, my undergraduate students. I look at how potential colleagues work with undergraduate students, and also looking at how strong their community engagement abilities are, and the sense that their work with community is not just an outreach. I think there's this misconception that engagement or outreach is engagement, and so having that strong partnership with communities is something that I look for in applications. Of course, it's probably difficult for those that are new in the job market, but you can probably show if you're applying for a job that during your PhD dissertation research that there was an attempt to work with communities. It also helps, depending on the job location, to reach out to potential stakeholders in the locality. When I was interviewed here at UCLA 8 years ago, I reached out to various Filipino American communities or organizations, and one of them actually hosted me, picked me up in the airport and hosted me for half a day. And I'm not sure, they said they're going to send a letter to the search committee during my when I was interviewed. So they might have, because I got the job. So those are some of the things on top of course, for someone who works in a region that a lot of us don't know or care about, try to link your regional expertise with a global issue of archaeological theory and methods.
Thank you. Julie, what are you looking for in job candidates?
Well, I want to thank the people who got the recent jobs. They gave an incredible example of what I think is the most important thing in a job interview. I am always looking for passion. I am looking to see what your story is and what motivated you and what got you there. Because let's face it, every job is a job and it takes passion and hard work. So if you think about Angela and her octopus and her tentacles, she was just passionate about how she translated from one region to another. And Albert's story about being not knowing about cheese, but just loving teaching. And it just made me like him, connect with him, and realize that he's never going to give up. And Christina, I love your story about just persevering and going through to the Smithsonian postdoc and then figuring out how to get experience of teaching. And if I was interviewing any of you, I would say, I want to have this person as part of my team, because you are demonstrating absolute passion about what you do and how dedicated you are to getting there. The second thing I am looking for is, what can you do? This is really, people make a mistake and talk about the theory or the research question or something a little bit too esoteric or theoretical. As a person who's expanding my team, I kind of want to know, what can you do? Can you run a field school? Can you run a lab? Do you know anything about databases? Do you know how to really run a GIS system? Are you good with statistics? I'm a historian, I can do technical editing. Well, yeah, okay, I want somebody who can do that. Can I teach large classes? Can I teach a broad array of classes? Can I connect with a community, which is what Stephen just said? Do I have experience in true consultation? Because for us here in the Northwest, we have to truly consult on an honest and trust-based consultation with tribes. And so a lot of us work with these communities. And, you know, I hired one person who at the end of her interview said, you know, I make the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. And, you know, I mean, okay, that's not why I'm going to hire her, but that was really indicative of the fact that, you know, she can do lots of things and she has a sense of humor. And so be passionate and be sure to tell the people who are interviewing you what you can do, what your talents and experience are, as well as your research and your regional expertise.
Thank you. And Sarah, what are you looking for?
So, well, I think people have covered this as well, but I'm coming from a private sector point of view, of course. I thought I should mention, though, at the beginning that when we talk about CRM in the United States, the private sector is sometimes a stepping stone and sometimes it's an endpoint. I think a lot of people get their experiences here, but these experiences can translate into other parts of CRM, like I know folks who've gone from private sector CRM into government and agency positions or into professor positions, and so the work has helped them out. To that point as well, people can enter CRM partly as a job and partly as a career. And so I'm going to speak more to the part about a career. It's very easy to get a job in CRM these days. I think Albert said if you had a heartbeat and were breathing, you could get a job as a programmer in the past. Right now in CRM, that's about the requirements, maybe a couple of classes as well, but it's a very big sector right now and growing. But when I'm hiring for a permanent position, for a career position, there's a couple of things I'm looking for. And one is that the company that I work at is one that doesn't have a lot of, in the past hasn't had a lot of transitions in it. We try and hire for life. And we've had people who, there was a period where, a couple folks, kind of, died, not because of the job, because they were old and, and things happen. So like it was a lifetime career and that kind of thing. Things are changing a bit, but I'm expecting to work with my colleagues for a decade or 3 decades or 4 decades. And so I look for, partly I look for teamwork. This is absolutely a team effort in CRM. Nobody can do these jobs alone when it's a big excavation project. We're very reliant on people who have multiple skills. people who have the technical skills like the artifact analysis, the regional skills like Angela talked about. That does matter for us because we only work in Arizona. Like I think if we were a bigger firm that had multiple offices, I've seen people who transition from office to office, and maybe that like needs a little less generic knowledge and or regional knowledge and can have more process-based knowledge. But in our company, we do need the regional knowledge to make our clients happy. So that matters. But also people like, people who can do the mapping, who can do databases. So we're looking for like people who can be part of a team and who can appreciate the team part and be like, you're my support person, but I appreciate you. So I also look for, I put a lot of value in the interviews that I have, and I'm trying to learn to trust my gut when I'm in these interviews with the people I'm hiring, and like just, a feeling of kindness, a feeling of like I want to work with you and get to know you, and trying to establish a rapport in that space, even if it's an hour or only an hour or so. That matters a lot, because when you have a bunch of people whose resumes are very good and equal in the interview, it's that quality of like, there's a quality there that I'm trying to learn to trust in some of my good hires. I think I've had that feeling even in the interview period. I also look for some creativity. I think of CRM as kind of like doing exploratory data analysis type of work. Like you never know where the places that you're going to be working. So you have to be very adaptable to what your research question has to be adaptable. You can't come into CRM being like, I want to study the late prehistoric, rituals or something like that. Because you don't know when you're going to get a site that's going to help answer your particular questions. But if you can somebody can plunk down a map in front of you and you could be like, okay, I think this is what goes on in this part of the state, and I'm going to adapt my research questions, and I'm going to have fun. I like adapting my research questions. That's the part where I have fun, is being that flexible. The kind of creativity, is a big plus if you're going to be in the kind of project director roles in our companies. You also need to be creative, because you're going to be there's so much in CRM that is what you weren't taught in grad school. I love giving talks to the MA classes here and being like, this is how you shop for porta-johns. I don't know if everyone has put as much thought into porta-johns as I have, but I put a lot of thought into that, and I'm ready to teach the next generation. But you end up working on maybe your company has a lot of we do a lot of work with the Department of Transportation, so you end up knowing a lot about highways and how highways are built, or sewer plants, and appreciating how a sewer plant expands, and you want to be able to talk to your client and and help them and be part of their team. And so that kind of creativity to be a little bit curious about how does a sewer plant work, will make you a good colleague and a good, or a good partner in these development projects that CRM helps with. So that kind of creativity, both research wise and in terms of working in a community-based development sort of project, is our skills that I really like in the people who will stay with the company for a long time. And then there's the thing that I should just always say, yeah, it does help. You do need an MA for probably a career position in CRM, or a PhD, but it's a little bit harder to stay on with a BA, although we definitely have some very, very excellent BAs at the company as well. And they just, at the beginning of their career, they get paired with people, and then they take on their own expertise a few years in. So
great, thank you. We're almost at the point where we want to break people up, but I want to have very brief answers of our hirers. You're in a job interview. How does a person get to the second round? How important is the job interview itself, and what should people do to stand out? Stephen, very short.
I would say just be yourself, but also knowing the crowd that you're presenting into, and during the interview and the presentation, and limit the talk to a maximum of 40 minutes. I've been in talks where you have the candidate spoke for more than an hour. People get tired after 40, 45 minutes. So a compelling presentation for me is brief, but provides an outline of what you have done so far, the current status of your research, and what's in the future for what you're doing. Drop hints that you know the program, mention convergences with faculty research, if any, or how your research complements and strengthens the potential program you're applying to. You don't have to name individual faculty, but having done your homework and getting to know the program means that you're interested in your potential colleagues' work. And lastly, again, 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes max, that gives you ample time for question and answer. It's not just your presentation that matters, it's also how you respond to questions. Repeat or paraphrase the question so that everyone understands the question, especially in an in-person setting when people in the back won't be able to clearly hear the question.
Great, thank you. Julie.
Well, I want to thank Stephen. He really covered the long interview when you've made it to the shortlist. So let me just give you a little bit of my opinion about the first interview, getting on the long list. It's usually shorter. It's often at SAA, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And inevitably, the first question is going to be, tell us about yourself and why you want this job. I mean, it's going to be asked of you. Practice the answer. Give it over and over again to your friends if they'll do it for you, but your dog, your cat, give it to the mirror. Just really think about how do you tell them about yourself and why you want the job and get across the kind of information you want. And I am amazed when people enter the job interview and they aren't prepared with an answer to that question. Also, there is going to be at the end, do you have any questions for us? They're going to ask you. I have asked that question to everyone. And it's amazing when people say, no, I don't have any questions for you. That means you did no research. You don't know who's there. You don't know what kinds of things would be interesting. It's a chance to show that passion and show your experience. So be prepared to answer those questions. Practice. And it's okay to be nervous. Everybody's nervous. In fact, if you're not nervous, it's a little weird, but at least have a prepared answer.
Thank you. Good tips. Well, good basic ideas. Yeah, Sarah.
I think every conference presentation I've ever given has been practiced to my closet in the back bedroom. So, Stephen and Julie definitely responded the same way I would to this question about asking the questions back, showing that you've done the research. Sometimes people perceive CRM as a second choice, third choice, bottom of the list career. So if you're coming in, at least pretend, but obviously I would love it if you actually wanted the job as well. The other thing I would say is that because people can rise in the ranks in CRM, like I did, but many people do, is that we don't always interview for a job. So the job in CRM is your interview. So doing a good job at it and impressing the supervisors, working with them as a team, and just doing a good solid job so that that we can recognize. One of the more fun things for me to do is when somebody's on a crew and their supervisors have said wonderful things about them, it's really fun to write that email that says, hey, would you like to become a permanent employee now? They don't even know that they interviewed for it, but they've been interviewing for it for the past 6 months or something like that with their good work. So sometimes there's opportunities like that in companies as well.
Thank you. Okay, we're at the hour. If you have to leave, then please do so, but we will be here another hour. I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. You can all choose where you want to hang out. We will unmute you or give you the possibility to unmute and to ask questions. Just a little bit of Zoom etiquette if you want. If you ask a question and you have a camera that works, please show your face. It's just a nicer conversation if our 6 guests can see who's asking the question. So after the breakout rooms, the last 5 minutes, we'll come back here at the main room. I will announce that I'm closing the breakout rooms, and then I will ask everybody to be back here who is still on the call, so that I can thank you properly. But I hugely appreciate the answers you've given so far. It was extremely useful. Okay, off we go.